There are crimes that happen in the heat of the moment, driven by anger that boils over in a split second. And then there are crimes that are planned, thought through, prepared for, and carried out in cold blood against someone who never even saw it coming. What you are about to hear is not a story of sudden rage. It is a story of jealousy that festered over months, of hatred that was fed and nurtured in secret, of a plan that was discussed, almost stopped, and then carried out on a quiet residential street on a perfectly ordinary Wednesday afternoon while a young man was simply doing his job. I am Kundi and this is Pulse America News. Stay with me because this story goes deeper than almost anything you have heard before, and every single detail matters. The afternoon of October 13, 2021 started like any other afternoon in the Somerset Meadows neighborhood of Longmont, Colorado. It was a calm, residential area. Houses sat close together, trees lined the streets. It was the kind of neighborhood where people felt safe, where children played outside, where neighbors recognized each other. A biker rode past. A mail truck moved slowly along the street. The kind of scene you would see 100 times and never think twice about. A postal worker was finishing up his deliveries, moving from house to house, doing the work he did every single day. His name was Jason Schaefer. He was 33 years old. He had a 6-year-old son. He had a girlfriend. He was building a life. He had no reason to believe that this particular afternoon would be any different from the ones that came before it. At 12:29 in the afternoon, Jason was back at his mail truck, standing near the vehicle loading and unloading, doing what postal workers do. And then a figure appeared. A person in a dark hoodie crossed the street, walking directly toward him. There was no hesitation, no moment of conversation that went wrong, no argument that escalated. The person walked up and opened fire. 5 shots. 5 loud bangs that rang out across that quiet neighborhood and shattered the peace of every single person within earshot. 10 seconds. That is all it took. 5 shots in 10 seconds. And then the shooter turned and ran, disappearing into the streets of that calm residential area, while Jason Schaefer lay on the ground, bleeding. The sound carried. In neighborhoods where houses sit close together and people are home in the middle of the day, 5 gunshots are impossible to ignore. Neighbors heard it immediately. Some came to their windows. Some stepped outside. A few witnessed parts of what happened. And within moments, the phone calls to emergency services began. One woman called in a state of complete shock. Her voice was trembling as she tried to explain what she had seen. She said that the postal worker, the man who had just delivered her mail not long ago, had been shot. She said there was a FedEx driver who had stopped to check on him. She said he was breathing, but that he was bleeding from his mouth. The dispatcher stayed on the line with her, asking questions, trying to gather information, trying to understand what had happened. But the woman on the phone was in shock. She had just watched a man get shot in the middle of a peaceful street in the middle of the day, and she could barely find the words to describe what she was seeing. First responders arrived approximately 10 minutes after the shooting. That 10 minutes felt like an eternity for the people who were there with Jason, trying to help him, not knowing what to do. The first officers on scene found him with multiple gunshot wounds, heavy blood loss, and not breathing. Paramedics stepped in and took over, working desperately to stabilize him, but the damage was catastrophic. Jason Schaefer did not survive. He was pronounced dead, and a neighborhood that had been calm and quiet 30 minutes earlier was now a crime scene surrounded by police tape, patrol cars, and investigators who were just beginning to understand the magnitude of what had taken place. The first thing detectives established was that this was not a robbery. Nothing was taken from Jason. Nothing was missing from the mail truck. No one grabbed his phone, his wallet, his keys, or anything else of value. The truck was undisturbed. 5 shell casings were recovered from the scene, all from the same caliber weapon, confirming the 5 shots that witnesses had reported. This was targeted. This was personal. Someone had come to that specific location at that specific time to kill this specific man, and they had done it efficiently and with clear intent. Because the victim was a United States postal worker, federal authorities were immediately brought in. A postal inspector arrived and identified the victim formally as Jason Schaefer, a 33-year-old mail carrier based out of the Longmont post office. With the victim identified, detectives immediately began building a picture of his life. his relationships, his recent activities, and anyone who might have had reason to want him dead. They spoke to his parents, who told them they had last seen Jason about 3 weeks before his death. He had recently moved into a new apartment with his girlfriend. Her name was Rosa. Rosa was at her workplace when the shooting happened, which supervisors were able to confirm. But detectives still needed to speak with her and brought her in for an interview. Rosa spoke clearly and with genuine grief. She described the morning, how Jason's alarm had gone off at 6:45, how he had left for work, how his son had gone to school. She described how he would text and call her throughout his shift, how he had even stopped by her workplace at 10:20 that morning and stayed for about 30 minutes before leaving just before 11. She said they had been texting back and forth for the rest of the morning, the way couples do when they are both working and stealing small moments to connect. And then the messages stopped coming. She said she knew something was wrong before anyone told her. She said the feeling had been building for weeks, this sense that something terrible was about to happen, that someone in their lives was capable of violence. When police came to her workplace and began talking to her supervisor, and when a mutual friend reached out to her through social media to ask if she was okay, she said she already knew. Before anyone confirmed it, she already knew that Jason was gone. And then she said something that immediately sharpened the focus of the investigation. She said she had been worried specifically about a woman named Devon. Devon was the mother of Jason's 6-year-old son. Devon was someone Jason had a complicated and difficult history with. But what made the situation unique, what added an entire other layer of tension and dysfunction to everything, was the relationship between Devon and Rosa. Because Rosa and Devon were sisters, Rosa was Devon's younger sister, and Jason, the man Devon had a child with, had started dating her younger sister several months earlier. That was the dynamic that sat at the center of everything that was about to unfold. Jason had first met Rosa when he dropped his son off at Devon's place. That was how it started. A greeting, a conversation, a connection that grew into something more. And when Devon found out that her ex and her younger sister were together, something shifted in her. The relationship between the two sisters had already been strained for years. Rosa had left the family home when she was around 16 and had largely been out of contact for nearly a decade. She had reconnected with Devon at the end of 2020. And had even lived with her briefly before the falling out that came when Devon discovered what was happening between Rosa and Jason. From Devon's perspective, it felt like a betrayal. It felt personal in a way that went beyond a normal breakup or a normal shift in relationships. Even though Devon had moved on and was seeing other people, this was different. This was her ex and her sister. And it ignited something in her that would grow darker and more dangerous over the months that followed. Rosa told detectives that Devon had been making her uncomfortable for some time. She described incidents of Devon showing up around Jason unexpectedly, going through his belongings at the post office without permission, rifling through his jacket pockets and looking through his things when she thought no one was watching. Jason had noticed too, and it had alarmed him. He had asked Devon why she was going through his things, why she kept showing up at his workplace, what she was looking for. He told Rosa about it, and the two of them had become increasingly uneasy about Devon's behavior in the weeks leading up to the shooting. Rosa said she had specifically told Jason to make sure the apartment was always locked. She said she had warned him to be careful. She said she had a feeling that Devon was going to do something, and when she heard that Jason had been shot, the name that came to her mind immediately was Devon. She told detectives without hesitation that she believed Devon was responsible. Around that same time, while Rosa was still being interviewed at the station, Devon called police. She had received multiple calls from former co-workers and people in her circle telling her that something had happened involving Jason. She was concerned about her son, who was supposed to be with Jason that day. She asked where he was. She was told that her son was safe and that she should come to the station to speak with investigators. Devon arrived, clearly agitated, demanding to know where her child was and why no one had contacted her immediately when the incident happened. She was frustrated that Rosa, whom she referred to with barely contained contempt, had been involved in picking up her son. She was insistent that Rosa had no legal standing to be near her child, and in the middle of all of this emotional noise and distress, a detective walked into the room and told her calmly and directly that Jason was dead, that someone had shot him in the face while he was working his postal route. Devon reacted with shock, asking how, asking where, repeating questions in rapid succession as the information landed. The detective did not waste time softening what came next. He told her plainly that because she fit the general description of the shooter, because her vehicle had been captured on surveillance cameras in the neighborhood at the time of the shooting, and because her work scanner had shown no movement during the window when the shooting occurred, she was being considered a suspect. Devon pushed back. She said she had been at work. She said she was in Loveland, 20 miles north of Longmont, during the time of the shooting. She said her scanner would show her route, but the detective already had the postal scanner data, and it told a very different story. Devon worked as a carrier out of the Loveland post office. She was supposed to be on her assigned route when Jason was shot. A postal inspector had pulled GPS data from her mail scanner, and the data showed her moving along her route during the morning hours. But around the time of the shooting, the scanner stopped moving completely. It went stationary and stayed that way for more than 2 hours. It was not on Devon's assigned route. It was not at the post office. It was not anywhere near where she was supposed to be, and her car, a black Nissan Rogue with a missing front right hubcap, had been captured on multiple cameras in the Somerset Meadows neighborhood, circling the area before the shooting and leaving in the direction the shooter had fled. The vehicle had first appeared near the neighborhood at 11:59 in the morning. Cameras picked it up again 6 minutes later on a nearby street. It circled through a cul-de-sac. Investigators followed its path through the footage as it left the area after the shooting. A license plate reader near the neighborhood entrance had captured the plate, and when detectives ran it, it came back registered to Devon. There was a missing front right hubcap matching exactly what the cameras had shown. This was Devon's car. The question was whether Devon had been driving it. When detectives laid this all out for Devon in the interview room, she had no explanation. She could not explain why her car was in that neighborhood. She could not explain why her scanner had been stationary. She could not reconcile her claim of being on her route in Loveland with the surveillance footage placing her vehicle miles away in Longmont at the exact time that Jason was shot. When the detective showed her the evidence and asked her directly how her car could have been at the crime scene while she claimed to be at work, she said she did not have an answer, and then she asked to speak to a lawyer. Questioning stopped immediately. A gunshot residue kit was brought in. Investigators collected samples from her hands and her face. Her clothing was collected for examination. And not long after, Devon Schreiner was placed under arrest and charged with first-degree murder in the death of Jason Schaefer. But detectives were not finished. Because the more they looked at the evidence, the more they began to suspect that Devon had not acted alone. There was someone else in this story, someone who had been close to Devon, who knew what she was planning, and who had his own role to play in what happened on that October afternoon. His name was A.J. Ritchie. He was Devon's boyfriend. He worked as a correctional officer at a federal prison. He had access to firearms, and according to Rosa, Devon had told Jason in the past that A.J. knew where Jason lived, and that A.J. would shoot him if it ever came to that. It was a comment Jason had passed on to Rosa, and Rosa had passed it on to detectives. That comment, combined with the GPS data that placed Devon's scanner near A.J.'s address during the shooting window, made A.J. the next person investigators needed to speak with. 5 days after the shooting, detectives drove to the federal correctional facility where A.J. worked and met with him in person. They introduced themselves, explained why they were there, and began working through the timeline of October 13th. A.J. had previously told investigators in a brief initial contact that Devon had been at his house that morning and had stayed until around 12:15 when he left to go to a restaurant. He had used her presence at his home as her alibi, but detectives had already dismantled that alibi. The surveillance footage showed Devon's car in the Longmont neighborhood at 12:06, 9 minutes before A.J. claimed she was still at his house. The two things could not both be true. When investigators placed the footage in front of A.J. and showed him the timestamp on the license plate reader image, he shifted his story. He admitted Devon had not actually been at his house until 12:15. He said she had come by afterward briefly just to use the bathroom and get some water. He said she had stopped by for about 10 minutes. He described what she was wearing in vague terms, mentioning darker pants and not being sure about the shirt, and then investigators pointed out that the shooter in the doorbell camera footage appeared to be wearing brown pants. A.J. did not have a solid answer for that either. Investigators then began pulling apart the rest of his timeline. They noted that the morning had actually started at Devon's house, not his own. He had spent the night there. His wife did not know. He had left Devon's house around 7 in the morning when Devon left for work. He told investigators he had spent the rest of the morning at home, running errands and staying in frequent phone contact with Devon throughout the day. He described the phone calls as casual, just checking in, talking about their day, the kind of ongoing conversation couples have when they are apart but staying connected. And then investigators showed him the cell phone GPS data. Because while AJ said he had been at home or running errands, his phone told a completely different story. After dropping Devon off at the Loveland post office that morning, AJ's phone began moving south, toward Longmont, toward the post office where Jason worked. And when investigators overlaid AJ's phone location data with the GPS data from Jason's postal scanner, showing Jason's movements along his mail route that morning, the overlay was striking. AJ's phone tracked Jason along almost the entire route. For 2 to 3 hours, AJ's phone signal moved in parallel with Jason's scanner, following him through the neighborhood, street by street, stop by stop. Investigators had originally been looking for AJ's personal vehicle, a black Chevrolet truck, in the neighborhood surveillance footage. They had not found it, but there was another vehicle connected to AJ that they had not yet considered. AJ worked at a federal correctional facility that participated in a vehicle loan program, providing employees with rideshare vehicles for commuting. These vehicles carried logos on the side, visible markings from the program. AJ had access to one of these vehicles, a Dodge Durango, and when investigators went back through the neighborhood surveillance footage looking specifically for that vehicle, they found it, a Durango with a green and blue logo on the driver's door. Following Jason Schaefer along his mail route on the morning of October 13, 2021, the picture was becoming undeniably clear. AJ had used a vehicle that was not registered to him, not personally associated with him, and that investigators had not initially thought to search for. In order to follow Jason through his route and track his exact location, he had then driven away from the neighborhood and gone to a restaurant in Loveland, a location he knew would have cameras and time-stamped records that could place him somewhere else at the time of the shooting. He had constructed an alibi and helped Devon construct hers, all while being aware that she was planning to kill Jason, and while actively assisting her in locating him. When confronted with the Durango footage and the cell phone GPS data, AJ had no credible explanation, and then investigators found something on his phone that removed any remaining ambiguity about his knowledge and involvement. During the review of his device, which he had consented to, investigators discovered a saved screenshot from a messaging application. The screenshot had been saved 2 days before the shooting. It showed a person standing in a bathroom wearing clothing that closely matched what the shooter had worn on the day of the murder, and within minutes of saving that image, AJ had saved a second screenshot from the same conversation. This one showed Devon's face clearly. There was no question about who the person in the bathroom was. Devon had sent those images to AJ 2 days before she walked across a residential street and shot Jason Schaefer 5 times, and AJ had saved them. That discovery broke the last wall of AJ's resistance. He had been sitting through the interview trying to manage his story, trying to limit his exposure, trying to present himself as someone who had tried to stop something he could not control. But the screenshots told a different story. A story of someone who knew exactly what was being planned, who had the images saved on his phone as documentation, and who had not gone to the police, not warned anyone in authority, not done anything to prevent it. At that point, AJ Ritchie began to talk, and what he said filled in the final, devastating pieces of everything that investigators had been trying to understand. He told investigators that Devon had been fixated on Jason's death for some time. It had not started with a single moment of rage. It had built slowly, fed by her anger over his relationship with Rosa, her fury over what she saw as a betrayal by both of them, and her growing desperation over the custody situation. Because just 2 days before the shooting, Jason had formally filed paperwork seeking increased custody of their son. That filing had reached Devon through her attorney, and according to AJ, it had pushed her past whatever limit had been holding her back. She had told AJ plainly and directly that she had decided this was what needed to happen, but it had not been the first time. AJ told investigators that 3 days before the shooting, Devon had told him she was going to kill Jason. She had described a plan to go to his apartment in the middle of the night. AJ said he had talked her out of it that night. He said he had gone to her in person and persuaded her to step back from what she was planning. He believed she had listened. He thought it was over, but when she dropped her son off at school on the morning of October 13th and left for her postal route, she called AJ and told him that she had changed her mind. She said she was going to do it that day. She said she had already obtained everything she needed to make it happen, and no matter what AJ said, no matter how he tried to talk her back, she told him there was nothing he could do to stop her. She was done waiting. She was done being angry. She was going to end it. AJ told investigators that Devon's original plan had been even more extreme than what she ultimately carried out. He said she had initially told him that she intended to kill Jason, kill Rosa, and then take her own life. A complete destruction of every person she blamed for the pain she felt. AJ said he had begged her not to do it. He said the thought of it horrified him, and at some point she had moved back from that full version of the plan, focusing only on Jason, but none of that changes what AJ did with the information he had. He did not call police. He did not contact Jason. He did not reach out to Rosa. He did not notify anyone at the post office. He did not send an anonymous tip. He did not do anything at all to prevent a murder he knew was coming. What he did instead was drive to Longmont. He told investigators that he wanted to warn Jason himself. He said he had found Jason's mail truck by knowing the route and the truck number, information Devon had given him. He said he drove alongside the route for hours, following Jason stop by stop, watching him work, tracking his location, and at some point he said he pulled over near Jason's truck and spoke to him directly. He said the conversation lasted less than 15 seconds. He told Jason that Devon was unstable and that he thought she was going to do something. He said Jason looked at him with no recognition, asked what he meant, and when AJ said Devon's name, Jason reportedly responded that he was not afraid of her and that she was not going to do anything. AJ said he accepted that response, turned around, and drove to the restaurant in Loveland. He placed himself at a location with cameras, ate a meal, and waited. Investigators were deeply skeptical of this version of events. If AJ truly believed Jason was in imminent danger, a 15-second warning and then leaving to go eat lunch at a restaurant with a security camera was not the behavior of someone trying to prevent a murder. It was the behavior of someone building an alibi while allowing a murder to proceed. The cell phone data showed him following Jason for hours before the shooting, not just long enough to deliver a brief warning and leave. The timeline of his movements showed him in and around the neighborhood until close to the moment of the shooting, and the saved screenshots on his phone showed he had known for at least 2 days that Devon was preparing to carry this out, with specific clothing chosen and decisions made. There was more. When investigators pulled months of text messages between AJ and Devon, they found a pattern of communication that went far beyond a couple navigating a difficult situation. Their messages showed a deep romantic entanglement, frequent contact, an extensive discussion of Devon's rage toward Jason and Rosa. And in several of those message threads, investigators found exchanges in which AJ himself had suggested that Jason and Rosa should be killed. These were not passive messages from someone trying to talk a troubled person down. These were active conversations in which both participants discussed violence against the two people Devon blamed for her pain. When confronted with this, AJ tried to explain it away. He said the messages were venting. He said he had been trying to manage Devon's emotions by engaging with what she was saying rather than shutting her down. But the investigators were not persuaded, and neither would a jury be, because the totality of everything, the tracking of Jason's route, the use of a vehicle not linked to him, the saved screenshots of Devon in the clothing she planned to wear, the months of messages discussing violence, the failure to warn anyone in a position to stop what was coming, and the deliberate construction of an alibi, all of it pointed to someone who was not an innocent bystander but an active participant in the planning and execution of a premeditated murder. Devon Schreiner had pulled the trigger. 5 shots, 10 seconds. She had crossed that residential street in Somerset Meadows wearing dark clothing and a mask, walked up to Jason Schaefer while he stood alone near his mail truck and shot him 5 times. Then she had walked away, gotten into her car, and driven off, leaving him in the street, bleeding and dying, while a neighborhood full of people began calling emergency services, and neighbors ran outside trying to understand what they had just heard. She had gone back to her postal route, clocked out at the end of her shift, returned home, and eventually come to the police station to collect her son, apparently believing she could manage the situation through the story she and AJ had prepared. But the investigators had been working fast. By the time Devon walked into that station, they already had her car on camera, her scanner data showing hours of unexplained inactivity, Rosa's account pointing directly to her, and the building blocks of a case that would only grow stronger in the days that followed. The gunshot residue test, the phone records, the cell tower data, the surveillance footage from homes, traffic lights, and banks along the route her car had traveled, the vehicle identification of the Durango, AJ's phone tracking data, and the damning screenshots saved on AJ's device all came together into a case that left very little room for reasonable doubt. Investigators worked meticulously and patiently to make sure every piece of evidence was properly documented, properly collected, and properly preserved. This was not a case built on confession or on a single witness. It was a case built on technology, on data, on the kind of digital trail that modern life leaves behind without people realizing it. The GPS on the postal scanner, the license plate reader at the neighborhood entrance, the Ring doorbell camera across the street, the cell tower records showing the location of 2 phones throughout the day, the surveillance footage from a dozen different cameras along a route that Devon had planned and driven with deliberate intent. Every single piece of evidence told the same story, and every single piece pointed to the same 2 people. The trial was held, and both Devon Schreiner and AJ Ritchie faced the full weight of the evidence against them. The prosecution presented the timeline, the data, the footage, and the witness testimony in a way that left the jury with a clear and coherent picture of what had happened and why. The defense tried to create doubt where little existed. But the screenshot saved on AJ's phone, the cell phone GPS showing him tracking Jason along his route for hours, the license plate reader capturing Devon's car in the neighborhood with the matching missing hubcap, and the postal scanner data showing hours of suspicious inactivity were simply too specific, too consistent, and too damning to explain away. The jury found both of them guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced each of them to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There would be no early release, no second chance, no opportunity to walk out of a prison cell and re-enter the world. Both Devon Schreiner and AJ Ritchie would spend the rest of their lives behind bars for the murder of Jason Schaefer. And in the middle of all of this, a 6-year-old boy lost everything. He lost his father on October 13, 2021, when his dad was shot 5 times on a quiet residential street while doing his job. And then, through the criminal justice process that followed, he effectively lost his mother as well, when Devon Schreiner was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. A child who had done nothing wrong, who was too young to fully understand what was happening, was left to navigate a world that had been shattered by 2 adults who chose jealousy, rage, and premeditated violence over everything else. The custody filing that Jason had submitted 2 days before his death, the paperwork that Devon had pointed to as a final provocation, was never resolved in the way he had hoped. His son would not get more time with his father. He would not grow up with a mother who had the freedom to be present in his life. He had lost both of them in one sentence handed down by a judge in a Colorado courtroom. Pulse America News wants to take a moment here to talk about what this case reveals about the nature of evidence in the modern world, because that is something worth understanding clearly. 20 years ago, a case like this would have been much harder to prove. Without the cell phone GPS data, without the postal scanner tracking, without the network of doorbell cameras and license plate readers and traffic surveillance systems that now cover our neighborhoods, Devon and AJ might have constructed an alibi solid enough to create reasonable doubt. But the world has changed. Every device we carry, every scanner we use, every camera we pass on the street is generating data constantly. And that data does not forget. It does not change its story under pressure. It does not get confused or misremember. It simply records, and it records accurately. The postal scanner that Devon carried on her route that day recorded every moment it was stationary. It recorded the exact GPS location where it sat during the 2+ hours when Devon was supposed to be delivering mail. It recorded the time it stopped moving and the time it started again, and it placed that scanner, at an address connected to AJ during the window when Jason was being murdered in Longmont. That single piece of data was one of the first things that made investigators certain they were dealing with a planned and deliberate crime, rather than something spontaneous or random. AJ's cell phone did the same thing. It recorded his location as he drove south from Loveland to Longmont. It recorded his path as he followed Jason's route through Somerset Meadows block by block for hours. It recorded his departure from the neighborhood. It recorded his arrival at the restaurant. And when investigators overlaid his location data with Jason's scanner data, the two tracks matched in a way that could not be explained by coincidence or by the kind of incidental overlap that might happen if two people simply happened to be in the same general area at the same time. AJ was following Jason. The data proved it beyond any reasonable alternative explanation. The Ring doorbell camera across the street from where the shooting happened captured the figure in dark clothing approaching the mail truck and then running away. It did not capture a face. The clothing and mask prevented that. But it captured the direction of approach, the direction of flight, and enough of the physical profile to allow investigators to draw reasonable conclusions about build and height. When compared with Devon's physical characteristics, the profile was consistent. When compared with AJ, who was significantly larger, it was not a match for the shooter. That camera, which its owner had probably installed to monitor package deliveries and deter porch theft, became a critical piece of evidence in a first-degree murder prosecution. The license plate reader near the neighborhood entrance was perhaps the single most important piece of hardware evidence in the entire case. These readers are installed at the entrances to many neighborhoods, communities, and parking areas across the country, often without residents being fully aware of how frequently they are capturing and logging vehicle data. Devon's black Nissan Rogue, with its distinctive missing front right hubcap, drove past that reader at 12:06 in the afternoon on October 13, 2021. The reader logged the plate. Investigators found that log, and when they compared it to the timestamp of the shooting and the description of the vehicle seen in other surveillance footage from the neighborhood, it confirmed that Devon's car had been there. That log, combined with the multiple other cameras that captured the same vehicle, built a visual timeline of Devon's movements that she could not credibly refute. What the case also demonstrated is something that Pulse America News believes people do not fully appreciate, which is how important it is to speak to investigators honestly and promptly when something happens. The more Devon tried to manage the story, the more her inconsistencies were exposed. The more AJ tried to protect himself by constructing a partial truth, the more the evidence around him made the partial truth look like what it was. Every lie, every omission, every attempt to shape the narrative in a self-serving direction became another piece of evidence that the prosecution could use to demonstrate consciousness of guilt. Because innocent people who have nothing to hide generally do not leave a trail of inconsistencies, and guilty people who are trying to hide something almost always do. Rosa, despite the enormous pain of the situation, despite having lost her partner and being in conflict with her own sister, gave investigators a clear and consistent account from her very first interview. She identified Devon as a suspect immediately. She described the behaviors she had witnessed. The incidents of Devon going through Jason's belongings, the threatening comment about AJ, the growing sense that something dangerous was coming. All of it checked out. All of it was corroborated by other evidence. Rosa's willingness to be honest, even about painful and complicated family dynamics, gave investigators the foundation they needed to pursue the right leads at the very beginning of the investigation. Jason Schaefer's story is a story about a man who is just trying to live his life. He had a complicated past with Devon. They had a history that included conflict, and he had made the decision to formalize the custody arrangement for their son, which was a responsible and legally appropriate thing to do. He had found a new relationship. He had moved into a new home. He was showing up to work every day, delivering mail to his neighbors, doing his job with the kind of quiet reliability that keeps communities functioning. He had no idea that the two people who would ultimately be convicted of his murder had been discussing killing him for months, that one of them had tracked his route on the very morning of his death, and that he had approximately 15 seconds of warning from someone who then drove away and left him to face what was coming alone. When AJ told investigators about that brief conversation, about approaching Jason near his truck and delivering what he described as a warning, about Jason responding that he was not afraid and that nothing was going to happen. It is impossible not to think about what would have been different if that conversation had been handled differently. If AJ had said plainly that Devon had a gun and that she was coming to kill him today, right now, call the police. If he had stayed with Jason. If he had made the call himself. If he had done any of the dozens of things that might have changed what happened at 12:29 that afternoon, Jason Schaefer might still be alive. His son might have grown up with a father. The story would be completely different. But AJ made different choices, and those choices cost Jason his life. The criminal justice system, despite all of its imperfections, worked in this case. Investigators from multiple agencies, including local law enforcement and the United States Postal Inspection Service, collaborated effectively and quickly. The evidence was collected, preserved, and analyzed with precision. The case was built patiently and thoroughly, and when it went to trial, a jury of ordinary citizens listened to the evidence and reached the only conclusion the evidence supported. Both Devon Schreiner and A.J. Ritchie were convicted of first-degree murder. Both were sentenced to life in prison without parole. Justice was served in the formal sense, even as nothing can ever truly restore what was lost. Jason Schaefer will not come back. His son cannot unhear what happened. The people who loved him cannot undo their grief. The Somerset Meadows neighborhood cannot unsee what happened on that quiet afternoon in October of 2021. And somewhere in the Colorado prison system, Devon Schreiner and A.J. Ritchie live with the consequences of choices they made over a period of months. Choices driven by jealousy and rage and a complete failure to think about anything beyond their own anger and pain. They gave up their freedom. They destroyed a family. They traumatized a community. And they orphaned a 6-year-old child who deserved none of what happened to him. This is Pulse America News. I am Kundi. This case is a reminder of how far modern investigative tools have come, of how data and technology have transformed the ability of investigators to reconstruct events with precision and hold the right people accountable. It is also a reminder of the human cost of violence, of what is left behind when someone decides that another person's life is worth less than their own anger. Jason Schaefer was a father. He was a partner. He was a co-worker and a neighbor and a postal worker who showed up to do his job every single day. He deserved better than what happened to him on October 13th, 2021. And now, thanks to the work of the investigators who built this case piece by piece, and the jury that weighed the evidence with care and seriousness, the people who took his life will never walk free again. If you followed this case from beginning to end, you already understand how much the digital evidence mattered. The scanner data, the cell phone GPS, the license plate reader, the doorbell camera, the surveillance footage from homes and traffic systems. Every single piece of it played a role in delivering justice for Jason Schaefer. Stay with Pulse America News for coverage of the cases that matter, told fully and honestly, with every detail laid out so that you can see exactly how it unfolds. I am Kundi, and I will see you in the next one.